Welcome to the third and last part of this lecture on opening up Middle English manuscripts terminology to discuss books. Okay, let's see where we are. Minims. Minims are kind of fun, aren't they? These are short vertical pen strokes used to form the letters I, U, M, and N. And sometimes these blend together, forming a minim, making a word difficult to read. So this looks like na 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 na, doesn't it? This actually says something. What it says, I'm not entirely sure. But these are a good example of minims where the U, the N, the I all run together. And it's hard to discern what's going on in the text. Mise en page, another French term. Page layout would be the term I would use. Page layout. Layout can say something about the way a text is conceived, how the writers of the book or the designers of the book were thinking about the book, who made the book, and the kinds of choices that were made in the presentation of a text. So here we have that fancy Q again, incipit, liber quintus, and then quarelli, and then I don't know what happens after that. So the rest of this is in its usual obscure Latin, but mise en page means the same as page layout. I would use page layout. Okay, ordinatio also means page layout. So this has to do with the organization of the page, including text, rubrics, chapter headings, running heads or titles. You get those at the top of pages of books still today. Decorated initials, images. So ordinatio equals layout. Orthography, which is on Kathy's list, is spelling. So spelling can also be a clue to where a scribe is from. And when was spelling regularized? Now, that's a good question. Who are the great arbiters of spelling? Who changes spelling and makes it uniform? The great one in the 18th century is Samuel Johnson. He was called the great lexicographer or dictionary maker. And also Daniel Webster in this country was an inventor of dictionaries. So orthography, a set form of orthography is comparatively recent. Even Shakespeare spells words multiple ways in his text. So unless they've been edited, in which case they've been regularized by the editor. And so you're not getting anything close to what the original spelling is in the first folio, at least. But don't get me onto Shakespeare. Orthography is spelling, and spelling can be variable, in other words. Paleography, which is a term that Kathy has, which I couldn't really think creatively how to illustrate that. Paleography just means the study of the history of script. So it's the study of the history of the script and the study of the script itself. That's what paleography is. The history of writing is what paleography means. Now we're on to paper stock. You can see this man making paper here with his little, sort of almost like a window screen thing they used that was metal that they would dip into vats of hot cloth that had been boiled down. So paper originally was made out of linen, among other things, which is why early paper is so durable. Anyway, paper is not made in England until the 15th century, but was imported from the continent, particularly from Italy. Watermarks in the paper are one way to identify where the paper comes from or who made it. And I'm going to get to watermarks in a second. But here you've got a picture from Joost Ammen's book of trades showing the paper maker at work. And then the stacks are placed to one side and to dry, and then sometimes hung up to dry as well. And then they're being readied for the press, the printing press. You do get some paper in manuscripts as well. It wasn't cheap. It was imported from the continent. So that's a brief history about paper. Paraph. A paraph is sometimes also called a pilcrow. I tend to call it a paraph. It's a paragraph mark. So it's an early form of paragraphing or just setting apart new sections of a text indicated by a mark, sometimes rubricated. And you see the paraph mark there at the left, line 3 in the left margin. It's rubricated, which means it's in red ink. Rubricating means to write in red ink. So that's being highlighted as a new section of this text by a paraph mark. Here we see an example in printed text, and the paraph mark makes it that crossover, it makes that transition from manuscript to print, and it's used to indicate sections or even new ideas. This has periods, it's using periods as well, which is called a punctus in medieval manuscript description. But it seems to have periods, and then it's also got paraph marks just to set apart a list of ideas here. This seems to be a grammatical text in Latin. Parchment. Here we have this picture again. Parchment just refers to the animal skin on which books were written and then later printed. A patron is someone who pays for, commissions the making of a book, and they sometimes appear in that book. So we have the royal patrons below the scene of Jesus praying on the Mount, who are slightly cut off here, these patrons, but these are the people who paid for the book, and they often do appear in the book somewhere. So it's a very different idea than commissioning art today. You wouldn't necessarily want your own portrait in the artwork, but in the Middle Ages, it was very popular actually to have your own portrait in the painting, even if it's a religious scene, to have your own portrait placed there as the patron. Here we have Christine de Pizan kneeling. She's blue. She's wearing one of that very fashionable horned headdress, and she's presenting the book in which this painting appears. So there's a degree of self-reflexivity here. She's handing the book that she's copied and had made to Queen Isabeau of Bavaria in what's called the Queen's Book, which is in the British Library now. So Isabeau is to the left. She's got an even more fashionable headdress on. And Christina's in blue, kneeling before the Queen and presenting her with her book. Isabeau is the patron of the book. Peccia system, not used in England so far as we know very much. It comes from the Latin piece. This was mostly used at the University of Paris. I think there's some evidence for this having been used at Oxford too. But what it means is that students who were poor would rent a piece of a book from a bookseller or a stationer and copy it themselves, or if they had some money, would get someone else to copy it for them that they were studying. So it's sort of like an early form of lending books to students. Not too common in England. There is a book in the Morgan Library, a notebook kept by a German student, I think it's 15th century, which has notes and copies from other texts in it in the student's own hand. So there is some evidence, but maybe because he was German. Anyway, I don't want to go off on this. But Peccia is the system by which you rent bits of books so that you can copy them and have the books for your class. A pen flourished initial is just an initial that's been decorated by penwork. Aha. So you see here in this page from John Gower's Confessio Amantis, you see the explicit prologus with its ascenders, and you see incipit liber primus with its ascenders, again decorated. Those would be called the E and the I, and the L's and the B would be considered pen flourished initial. Flourished with cattles and also with strap work. Pen trials are where someone's just testing the pen, because of course they're writing with quill pens, which are not totally reliable. And you see pen trials on these fly leaves and paste down that I showed you before. Kind of, you look at the B on the left and you go to the right, that's probably a pen trial, or they're trying to see if their pen works. We still do this with our ballpoints. Pricking. Pricking has to do with the way a page is ruled, and what you would do would be to take an awl or a little knife and make little holes on the right side of the page, as you see here, and then use a ruler to line up your lines. So you make it on the right side of the page and the left side of the page, and then use that with a ruler to try to rule out the lines, though it doesn't look like he did the best job with his ruler here. Lines are a little wavy, but that's what pricking is. Pricking refers to puncturing a page to rule it, to add writing lines to it. Provenance refers to the whole history of a manuscript's ownership using various pieces of evidence. So sometimes the library catalog will give you that. They'll give you as much as they know. Sometimes examination of a text will also help you to figure out something about provenance. Sometimes owners write their names in manuscripts. This is the Takamiya Canterbury Tales again, where we have, I assume this is Chaucer, sitting in his locus amanus, his pleasant place, sitting on a little bank of hedges or something here. And you see the opening lines. When that April with his shorter sota. Well, I can't actually see that part. I can just see when that April at the top of the page with some ascenders there going into the upper margins and acanthus leaves in the border there. Quire, we've talked about. Quire is a gathering of folded leaves, and usually there are 8 leaves each, but you can find quires up to 20 leaves. And if a quire is missing a leaf, there's an uneven number of leaves or pages. This means literally sitting with the book and counting. You can't tell this from online as far as I know. I don't think I could do it. And usually we're told about the collation of the quires, the way the quires are put together from the library catalog. So you don't have to worry about that very much. Some books do have missing leaves, missing pictures, missing pages, and so the quire will be uneven. Quire signatures. Yes, sometimes you get a book that's completely unpaginated, as in this one. This is a later printed edition of the letter of Otea, the goddess, to Hector of Troy, that work by Christine de Pizan. And here you've got the signature. It's A3 at the bottom of the page. A3 is, you don't have any page numbers. You just have these signature numbers. So most medieval and early modern books are not paginated. So you've got this number system. So this is page 3 of this signature or quire, which is A. And so this is A3 recto, if you're going to cite this, by page, because there's no other way to do it, really. A roll. Well, the earliest form of books was the roll or scroll. Rolls were sometimes used for religious or magical purposes, or both. This roll, which is a very famous one and also a very delicate one in the Morgan Library, has various religious illustrations, like here are the 3 nails connected with the crucifixion of Christ, plus the crown of thorns, which is the thing around them. And then there are 4 evangelists drawn rather rudimentarily around that. So this is a religious manuscript, but it's also got magical formulas in it. So it's got charms against the plague and also charms to aid in childbirth. So religion and magic are interestingly intertwined in the Middle Ages in some texts. And this scroll would have been used to carry around. You could carry it around with you more readily, perhaps, than a heavy codex or book as we know it today. Here's another example of a roll. This is the Rouse roll. It's not entirely finished, as you see. You see all the underdrawings here. And this is a genealogy. So this is a family history. And this, again, was rolled up. It could be readily carried. So roll form continued to be used for law, continued to be used for chronicles or histories, it continued to be used for genealogies and also religious texts. And the way a roll is put together is it was sewn pieces of vellum almost always. There are no paper rolls that I'm aware of. There may be one, possibly. But they're vellum that is sewn together and then rolled up. So that's what a roll is. And the roll is the earliest form of the book. prior to the codex. And there's a very funny YouTube film that shows these monks first seeing a codex or a book for the first time after being familiar with rolls. A rubric is writing in red. At least that's what it meant originally. Rubrica is read in Latin, and headings are written in red. So a rubric can refer to a title, a chapter heading, introductory material. So you see that here. This is again the Morgan manuscript, M126 of the Confessio Amantis, with the red writing in Latin, actually, at the beginning and end of chapters. So we've got Explicit Prologus, and then we've got Incipit Liber Primus, and then we have a Latin summary of what's going to happen in this book, Book 1, Liber Primus, in red. So, and the rubricator, someone who's called a rubricator, is the scribe who writes in red ink. And sometimes he's the scribe who wrote the text, as in this case, and sometimes he's another scribe. So that manuscript you saw of Mallory's Mort Arthur, the Winchester manuscript, I think there are two scribes working there, as I recall. And the rubricator, all of the names of the Arthurian characters are written in red, I think with the exception of Mordred in the Winchester manuscript. And the red names have been supplied later, as I recall. This may be wrong. I'd have to look it up. Here's our scribe. This is Marie de France, actually. This is from a manuscript of her fables, writing in the 12th century. And she's shown at her desk writing away. We do know that there were women scribes as well as men scribes. The famous scribes we know by name, besides Christine de Pizan, are Adam Pinkhurst, who was thought to be Chaucer's scribe, Ricardus Franciscus, who I've worked on for a long time, who writes in 3 languages quite competently, and John Shirley, who not only commissioned manuscripts but also bought and sold them. So he was an early bookseller / stationer. Stationer is more or less a bookseller or a seller of things that you need to make a book sometimes. Anyway, John Shirley is a kind of famous name associated with Chaucer manuscripts and also other manuscripts in the 15th century. Marie probably didn't write her own books. She doesn't say anything about, well, she talks about her writing books, but she doesn't say anything about copying manuscripts. But perhaps I'm being too specific here. But we definitely have this portrait of Marie in a manuscript of her fables, writing her book with her little pen, and then she's got her eraser thing held in the left hand there. Script just means writing, pretty obvious. Scriptorium is a room for writing, so that's what's going on there. Let's see if I've missed anything in Kathy's list. I may have missed out something, but what? Yep, this is a scriptorium is just a writing room. They are not always monastic. They are not always in nunneries and other kinds of convent or abbey. We also have scribes copying government documents, presumably in the same space, and possibly literary works as well, being copied in a workshop. Shelf mark refers to the name of the book in the library, how the library has named the book. So it's the original call number or the identifying number of a book, or a later one. And this is actually a page showing you bits of the Cotton Library, which went to the British Library quite early on. So the Morgan Library books are all M something, like M126 is Gower's Confessio Amantis manuscript that I've been showing you pages from, or G for Glazier, which is another collection. So when you're writing about it, you can refer to the book. When you talk about your book, you should have a mention of its shelf mark. Where is it? Where is that book? Siglum. Yeah, I don't use this much. I almost never abbreviate manuscript titles by shelf mark. Some people do. I don't think it's good form, frankly. Once you mention the shelf mark once, that's probably enough. And right now I'm showing you a really beautiful Celtic bookbinding, which has nothing to do with Siglum, but I thought I'd show it to you anyway. This is a book that was recently bought, I think recently uncovered, and bought in the last decade. I'll have to look into its history more. A stationer is someone, we see this little guy writing again, he's a scribe writing in the bottom of this blurry slide. He provided materials for the book trade and books for rent, it's thought, He may have commissioned works from scribes like John Shirley did, probably. He's sort of a middleman who can do a lot of the jobs. He's has many jobs. He's not just copying manuscripts. Stemma, you'll run across this from time to time when you're looking at the history of a text. I would say ignore this, but you should know what it is when you see it. So that's why I'm telling you about it. Scholars think that it's helpful to make a family tree of the extant manuscripts, the manuscripts still existing, of the same text that show how the manuscripts relate to each other for editorial purposes. These are sometimes useful, but others are downright confusing. I have problems with this because manuscripts are not really, this is based on charts used for genetics, actually. So a genealogical tree of manuscripts sort of doesn't make a lot of sense to me because manuscripts aren't human. Anyway, you can see here what sigla are. Sigla are the way these manuscripts are being discussed. I think this is for the Parliament of Fowls, and H may refer to the Huntington manuscript, and CX here refers to Caxton. But do not worry about this. It's just good to know when you see this what it is. It's an attempt at making some kind of connection between extant texts that exist, to each other. I think doing this more simply would probably not be a bad exercise, but it starts to get a little crazy, as you see here. To transcribe. To transcribe means to copy exactly what you see. You are not editing it. You are not correcting it. You are just copying it. So when you transcribe a short text, medieval text, early modern text, you are making an exact copy of the text that you see before you without editing it, changing it, or modernizing it. Underdrawing. Well, we've seen some examples of this in manuscripts that were unfinished, like the Rouse roll that I showed you as an example of a roll or a scroll. This is from the Beauchamp pageants, and it's really debatable whether this is finished or not, but this has all been, these are pencil drawings, essentially. These are all drawings in pencil that were never painted in. And it's not entirely finished, and no one quite knows what happened with this. The drawings themselves are quite beautiful, as you see in this baptism scene. And that lady wearing the butterfly veil is very fashionable. But this is a pencil drawing, and it was thought by some people that this was intended at some point to have been colored in, which may be the case. Or other people suspect it may have been underdrawings or drawings as plans for some kind of tapestries, which is also possible. But at least we have these drawings, which are really magnificent. Hard to tell whether they're finished or not, but these are pencil drawings. And usually with underdrawing, you get, then there was some underdrawing from most miniatures that you're looking at or illuminations you were looking at. There's probably a way to reconstruct that too, using various kinds of lighting technique we've got now for other images that are painted over. Vellum. Now here's a good example of vellum. This is basic skin that's stretched, usually of veal or sheep or goats, sometimes cow. Vellum is very soft. It's expensive. It's stretched on a rack like this. The hair side is scraped. The hair's scraped off the hair side, and it's then cut into leaves to be made into a manuscript. This is a watermark. You see this is a mark. See that white mark? It's a mark left by the metal frame when paper is made that identifies its manufacturer. So you see those fleur-de-lis there? There's 3 fleur-de-lis that I see in a shield, and that would identify who made that paper. So a watermark is part of the paper making process that also identifies the producer of that paper. Sometimes the watermark is visible, but you don't really know who the maker was, or the maker isn't in any catalog of watermarks or accessible catalog. So that can be annoying. Other times you can find the maker of the paper right away. And I did get into trouble once in the reading room of the British Library because I was holding a paper manuscript up to the light to get a look at that watermark, and this man came and rapped my desk with his ruler and told me to put the book back into its cradle. The cradle is where a book rests in a rare book room. Here we are with a workshop again, which is the same as a scriptorium, and the same as atelier, if you want to call it that. I would just call this a workshop. And I think Kathy's list of definitions was put together obviously by different people and not necessarily proofread all together, because in her definition she said, oh, well, they're artist workshops, but maybe not scribal workshops. But actually, there seem to have been both. Also, keep in mind that workshop, it wasn't like an office that you went to, it was probably somebody's house. Most work takes place in the home in the Middle Ages, or the shop is in the home. So they're all one place. So I think this is the end of my 3-part lecture on terminology when discussing books. Thank you. Oh no, here's some naughty marginalia. What is going on here? Ooh, that's very naughty. There's some naughty stuff. Well, I won't linger here. And then we have these cute little guys, so I showed you before. And then, oh my goodness, what's going on here? Well, I probably should have stopped this earlier. Okay, I will move on now to other things, and you should too.